Right, year 8. This is taking us on a little bit further into Macbeth. The last scene we looked at, so the 6th presentation I've done for you, was on a bit of context to Macbeth. But moreover, it was very much about looking at Act 1, Scene 1 and the witches and the importance of that scene. Forgive me if I keep on disappearing and checking, it's just want to keep on making sure that both the camera is working and the memory card. It's got sufficient space on it. Okay, straight after Act 1, Scene 1, obviously we go into Act 1, Scene 2. And we're introduced to the character of Macbeth, if you like, through reputation more than anything else. And it's a device that Shakespeare uses quite a lot in this play to build up the atmosphere, if you like, around that character. And as I said, Richard III, very much an Elizabethan audience, would have been on an understanding that that character was going to be a villain from the beginning. In spite of the fact that an Elizabethan audience would have known that the tragedy of Macbeth was likely to be, conventionally, this high-born man who actually slides from power, if you like. At the beginning of the play, as I said, he is very much the hero of the piece. Okay? So, you can obviously pause it on these things to give yourself an understanding. But in Act 1, Scene 2, what are we introduced to? I'm going to be reading bits from the play, just to make it absolutely clear to you. What are we introduced to in Act 1, Scene 2? Well, a messenger comes onto the stage, and that messenger is covered in blood. He's been at the battle, which the witches refer to in Act 1, Scene 1, when the hurly-burly's done, when the battle's lost and won. And this messenger has been at the battle, and he is reporting to the king, King Duncan if you like, what has happened in this battle. Okay? So it starts off with, and as I said, I won't necessarily put on Scottish accents, not just because I can't do them particularly well, but secondly because it will make it less clear for you. So Duncan, the king, says, "What bloody man is that? He can report, as seemeth by his plight, by all the blood all over him, of the revolt, the newest state." So what happens in the battle? And Malcolm, who's one of Duncan's sons, says, "This is the sergeant who like a good and hardy soldier fought against my captivity, so kept me safe. Hail, brave friend, say to the king the knowledge of the broil, the battle, as thou didst leave it." So as you were leaving, what is it actually that you saw happening in the battle? Okay? And this is what this messenger says. "Doubtful it stood, as two spent swimmers that do cling together and choke their art." Now Shakespeare is full of imagery, okay? And one of the images that he explains here, if you can imagine, is if you're in a swimming pool or in the sea, and in order to, if you find yourself flagging or tiring like that, people tend to cling to one another. But in doing that, you actually make it worse. In doing that, you are choking your art at your ability to swim. And it's like that with these two armies. These two armies have got so close to each other that they're stopping each other from fighting, if you like, because they're too close quarters, okay? "The merciless MacDonald, worthy to be a rebel, fought about the multiplying villains of nature do swarm upon him." So there is the person who's Macbeth, and Banquo, his friend, are fighting, is another Scottish lord called MacDonald, okay? From the Western Isles of cairns and gallowglasses is supplied, okay? They are armed soldiers. Gallowglasses are soldiers armed with axes. "And fortune on his damned quarrel smiling, shows like a rebel's whore, but all's too weak." Okay, so it looks as though that fortune is smiling on MacDonald, the person whom Macbeth is fighting. Now remember what we said about one of the conventions, just bear with me while I check. Remember what we said about one of the conventions of tragedy, and one of those is that Macbeth is coming up against a power greater than himself. In this case, fate, things which are going to happen. And Macbeth is the type of man who is so strong of will and so strong that he can change fate. In this case, he can change fortune. MacDonald looks as though fortune is being favourable to him. But then it says, "But all's too weak for brave Macbeth." Now straight away we have this idea, what is it we can say about Macbeth? Macbeth is brave. just as Richard III was, but these are very positive things at the beginning. For brave Macbeth, well, he deserves that name. Disdaining fortune. So Macbeth sort of says, you know what, if it looks as though we're going to lose this battle, I'm not going to go along with that, I'm going to change it. I'm going to disdain fortune. Disdain means treat it with some sort of derision, treat it as what it deserves. Okay? So Macbeth disdains fortune. So, what also can we say about him? He has the ability to change fate, change what looks as though is going to happen. With brandished steel, which smote with bloody execution. So there's Macbeth with his sword, with brandished steel, which is smoking with execution from the hot blood of all those people that he is fighting. Okay, so he's not just a brave fighter, he's incredibly skillful at fighting and merciless. Which smoked with bloody execution, like valour's minion, carved out his passage till he faced the slave. So, on this battlefield, there's Macbeth, and he sees MacDonald there. The man, remember what he said about when Richard III was fighting at the Battle of Bosworth? If he was going to defeat the army, one way that you can do that is to kill the leader of that army. And just as Richard III was looking for Richmond, Henry Tudor, Henry VII, so Macbeth is looking for MacDonald. And he carves his way among the other men with his sword till he faced the slave, which ne'er shook hands nor bade farewell to him, till he unseamed him from the nave to the chops. So there Macbeth fights MacDonald and unseams him, cuts him from the belly all the way up to the throat, and fixed his head upon our battlements, and chops off MacDonald's head and puts it on a spike and puts it on the battlements. Okay, so Macbeth, albeit as I said, this is a bloodthirsty and quite a violent play, and Macbeth is a bloodthirsty and rather violent character, nonetheless, he's very good at what he does. And he changes fate. And Duncan's response to that is, oh, valiant cousin, worthy gentleman. And then something else happens. As whence the sun begins his reflection, shipwrecking storms and direful thunders, so from that spring whence comfort seemed to come, discomfort swells. Mark, King of Scotland. This is the messenger saying it again. Mark, King of Scotland. No sooner justice had with valour armed, compelled these skipping cairns to trust their heels, but the Norwegian lord, surveying vantage, with furbished arms and new supplies of men, began a fresh assault. And just as MacDonald has been killed by Macbeth, there's an attack by another army on Macbeth's army. An attack by the Norwegian king called Sweno. Okay? And Duncan says, dismayed not this our captains, Macbeth and Banquo? Didn't this dishearten Macbeth and Banquo? Did they give up? Remember what we said about Richard III and not giving up? And the captain says sarcastically, yes, as sparrows, eagles, or the hare, lions. For I say sooth, I must report that there were as cannons overcharged with double cracks, so they doubly redoubled strokes upon the foe. Immediately, Macbeth and Banquo show that they are determined. They didn't give up faced with another enemy. They could have capitulated, they could have given up, but they doubly redoubled their strokes, went even harder at the enemy. Except they meant to bathe in reeking wounds or memorise another Golgotha. I cannot tell, but I am faint, my gashes cry for help. And he's dismissed. So we can find from this messenger that Macbeth in battle is brave, he's determined, even after the second assault of a second army upon his. Very importantly, he has the ability to change fate and change what seems inevitable. And he's a very skillful fighter as well. And obviously he's got the loyalty of his men. Okay? And then, this is an important part as well. Malcolm, the worthy Thane of Ross, comes along. And Duncan says, what has happened here? And Ross says, from Fife, great king, where the Norwegian banners flout the sky and fan our people cold, Norway himself, with terrible numbers, assisted by the most disloyal traitor, the Thane of Cawdor. Okay? Now, Macbeth's army and Banquo's army have just beaten MacDonald. They now have to fight the army of the King of Norway called Sweno. The King of Norway's army is assisted by another man, a Scottish traitor called the Thane of Cawdor. Okay, I'll leave this up here so you've got this little summary of what I'm talking about. So you've got Macbeth and Banquo and Norwegian Swano and the Thane of Cawdor. Okay, but Macbeth and Banquo fight that army and they win again. Okay, and Duncan responds, great happiness. And Ross says that now Swano, the Norway's king, craves composition, nor would we design him burial of his men till he reimbursed us. So essentially, you know, when you win a battle like that, they didn't kill the Norwegian king, but they got lots of money from him. Okay. Now Duncan very importantly says at the end of this scene, no more that Thane of Cawdor shall deceive our bosom interest. Go pronounce his present death. So they're saying that the Thane of Cawdor, who's a traitor, helping the other army against Duncan and Macbeth, is going to be killed, is going to be executed. But very, very importantly, and with his former title, greet Macbeth. Or to put it another way, what he hath lost, noble Macbeth hath won. Now at the beginning of this play, Macbeth is already a thane, okay, in Scotland, okay, is the equivalent of a lord in England. So a landowner, someone who's powerful. At the beginning of this play, the character Macbeth is the thane of a smaller place, but influential nonetheless, called Glamis. Spelled Glamis, but Glamis. The Thane of Glamis. And because the Thane of Cawdor was a traitor, and because Duncan has said, right, well, what we're going to do is give that lordship to Macbeth as well, Macbeth is also Thane of Cawdor. Okay? He doesn't know that yet. He doesn't know that that which Cawdor has lost, he has gained. He has won. Okay? Now, then we go to Act 1, Scene 3. Okay? And in Act 1, Scene 3, the witches, that opens up with thunder, enter 3 witches. We know all about the thunder and what that represents. And we have the witches waiting for Macbeth. Where the place? Upon the heath. Because, as we said in Act 1, Scene 1, that is where they have planned to meet Macbeth. Not by chance, because they are actually looking at it and they're saying, we know where he's going to be and when he's going to be there after the battle. Let me just check. Okay. Alright, so Act 1, Scene 3. And there you have a little bit of a spell going on at the beginning. And then the third, which says, a drum, Macbeth doth come. And the drum obviously is because they're drumming after the battle. And the weird sisters, they greet Macbeth and Banquo. Okay? Now Macbeth, strangely, his words here are very much a repetition of the words of the witches in Act 1, Scene 1. Macbeth's opening words in the play are, so foul and fair a day I have not seen. So foul and fair a day I have not seen. I won't do Scottish accent. But he's repeating the words used by the witches. Now, is this to suggest to us that he is already coming under their influence? Okay? And Banquo sees the witches, okay? Sees the 3 weird sisters and say, what are these so withered and so wild in their attire? They look not like the inhabitants of the earth, and yet are on it. Okay? And he asks them to speak. Macbeth says, speak if you can, what are you? Speak if you can, what are you? And the first witch says to Macbeth, all hail Macbeth, hail to thee, Thane of Glamis. Now, of course, his reaction is going to be to that, well, I am the Thane of Glamis, so that's all right. Okay? I've got no problem with being called Thane of Glamis, albeit there are 3 weird sisters, albeit there are 3 witches, I've got no problem with being called the Thane of Glamis. But then the second witch says to him, all hail Macbeth, hail to thee, Thane of Cawdor. Now, we know he's Thane of Cawdor. That's called dramatic irony, when we, the audience, know something the character doesn't. Okay? We know he's Thane of Cawdor, but Macbeth doesn't. So he starts thinking at that point, well, why is she greeting me with a title which isn't mine? And then the third witch says, All hail Macbeth that shalt be king hereafter. Okay? And Macbeth obviously thinks, well, look, hang on, this is getting ridiculous. I can't trust what these three say, because yes, I am that, but I'm not that, and I'm definitely not that. Thane of Cawdor, as far as he knows, is still alive, and wasn't a traitor, he didn't know that yet. And obviously King Duncan is around, so it can't be that. Okay? And then Banquo hears what they've got to say. But he notices straight away that Macbeth seems rapt with awe. Okay? Now, rapt with awe means that already Macbeth seems to be thinking about what the witches have said. That little seed of ambition is in his mind, straight away. And this is where, from these very positive things we can say about him, that ambition, do you remember I said that fatal flaw, that little thing that is in his mind, which is likely to bring him down, his ambition. What if, maybe. Okay? And then they say, oh, hail, hail, hail. And they start talking to Banquo about the fact that he's not going to become a king himself, but could be. And Macbeth says, stay, you imperfect speakers, he asked the witches to say. Tell me more. By Sinel's death, I know I am Thane of Glamis. But how of Cawdor? The Thane of Cawdor lives, a prosperous gentleman, and to be king stands not within the prospect of belief, no more than to be Cawdor. Say from whence you owe this strange intelligence, or why upon this blasted heath you stop our way with such prophetic greeting. Speak, I charge you. But then the witches disappear, the witches vanish into the wind. Now, these two discuss what they've just seen for a moment. And then a messenger from the king arrives called Ross. Okay? And he says, the king hath happily received, Macbeth, the news of thy success in battle. And when he reads thy personal venture in the rebels' fight, his wonders and his praises do contend which should be thine or his. Silenced with that, in viewing over the rest of the selfsame day, he finds thee in the stout Norwegian ranks, nothing afeard at what thyself didst make. Strange images of death, as thick as hail, came post with post, and every one did bear thy praises in his kingdom's great defence, and poured them down upon him. Okay? Then Angus, who's another one of the messengers, says, we are sent to give thee for our royal master thanks, only to herald thee into his sight, not pay thee. Okay? And Ross says, and for an earnest of a greater honour, he bade me from him call thee Thane of Cawdor. So these messengers come from the king and say, in way of thanks for what you did on the battlefield, you are now going to become Thane of Cawdor. That the witches had just told him he was going to become and couldn't believe. Now imagine that. Immediately he's thinking, hang on. These witches have just told me I'm going to get some prize, a lordship, Thane of Cawdor, and then within minutes, messengers from the king come along and tell me that's exactly what I've got. Now if he's a man of ambition and he's got this seed of ambition in his mind, he will be thinking, what next? Banquo says, what, can the devil speak true? And Macbeth says, the Thane of Cawdor lives. Why do you dress me in borrowed robes? Why are you dressing me up in something that isn't mine? The Thane of Cawdor is alive. Now remember what I said about disguises. Why are you dressing me in borrowed robes? Who was the Thane of Cawdor lives yet, but under great judgment bears his life, which he deserves to lose. The Thane of Cawdor is going to be executed. Now, aside, when we have it say aside like that, it means that Macbeth is thinking something to himself. And it tells us straight away that that seed of ambition is beginning to grow in his mind. He says, Glamis and Thane of Cawdor, the greatest is behind. I am Glamis, I am Thane of Cawdor. The greatest is behind means the greatest is yet to come, kingship. and those two men disappear. Okay? And Macbeth says to himself again, two truths are told, as happy prologues to that swelling act of the imperial theme. Okay? Now we can see from this that immediately Macbeth is overcome by ambition. This supernatural soliciting cannot be ill, cannot be good. If ill, why hath it given me earnest of success, commencing in a truth? I am Thane of Cawdor. If good, why do I yield to the suggestion whose horrid image doth unfix my hair and make my seated heart knock at my ribs against the use of nature? Why is it that immediately as I'm told of this one, I start thinking about this one? And even though it's going to be a terrible thing if I'm going to do it, if I'm going to fulfill my ambition, it excites me. The prospect of it excites me. And Banquo says to the other two messengers who are still there, look how our partner's rapt. Look how Macbeth is immediately drawn in. And Macbeth says to himself, if chance will have me king, why chance may crown me. Maybe fate will just make me king. Okay? And then they all disappear. But we can see very, very clearly there that Macbeth has the seeds of ambition firmly planted in his head. Now he is fixed on this. Now he is fixed on, am I going to become king? Am I going to become king by doing something about it? Or am I simply going to become king because fate will make me king? Okay? Now the next scene, Act 1, Scene 4, is a very short scene where the king, Duncan again, is very, very simply saying, right, I'm going to make it that Malcolm, my son, is next in line enthroned to me. So immediately, just like with Richard III, where Richard was thinking, right, so I've got to overcome Edward IV, my oldest brother, George Duke of Clarence, my second oldest brother, and in between them in terms of kingship would be my nephews Edward and Richard. Similarly, Macbeth is thinking now, well, if I'm going to become king, I've got to get rid of Duncan, but now also I've got to get rid of his son Malcolm and another son that he has called Donalbain. So Macbeth is thinking, I have to kill my way to the throne. And do you remember what I said about things that Shakespeare might have identified in Richard III? He probably found interesting and is using in themes and ideas in his later bigger plays. Okay? Now, the next scene we look at will be Act 1, Scene 5. And Act 1, Scene 5 is the introduction to our focus character, who is Lady